Welcome to For Our Edification, a show about personal leadership conversations that help to boost our identity and value and enhance the communities around us. I'm Halima Francis. I am not your regular host for the show, but today I'm so excited that I get to sit in the host seat, and I have a very special guest with me today who I'll introduce shortly. Yes, I'm going to introduce him. So, we flipped the table, so to speak, and I'm going to take full advantage of it. I want to wish everyone a happy and blessed new year as we go into 2025. And I also do want to take a moment to extend our prayers and support for everybody who was affected by the recent New Orleans morning tragedy on Bourbon Street. We're all connected. So when something like this happens in our community, it hits kind of hard. So when I heard about it early this morning, I was kind of stunned. And throughout the day, I've been getting messages from folk checking in, letting us know how they're doing. So, as we start the new year, I do want to extend that support to everyone, and let you know that you're in our prayers. It hurts. It hurts and it hits hard. And I think that as we get into this conversation, we'll have the opportunity to kind of unpack why moments like this have such an impact. Like I said, it connects us all. We are all connected. And so certainly we feel when others feel. So, as I shared, I am very excited to have as my guest none other than the incomparable Eddie Francis. Yes, I'm going to use all of the all the grandiose descriptors because it's genuine. When I look at Eddie, and this is not only, or perhaps additionally, because he is my husband, I get to see a side of him from a leadership perspective that not many get to see, right? So, in doing this interview, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Eddie, one of the reasons why I went to him and said, can I interview you at some point? And I asked him this, wow, like 6 months ago or so. We're just getting to it. But he agreed to do it. And he is often on the other side of the microphone interviewing other folk, listening to their stories. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to him, why I wanted to interview him in this space and in this setting, was because I believe he has an amazing story. I wanted to share with you some of the things that motivate him for what all the things that he does, all the things that he's contributed to the respective spaces that he has played a role in. So hopefully you will walk away from this conversation, or after hearing this conversation, having more insight into who is the amazing, edifying Eddie Francis. And also you'll have the opportunity to just learn more about what makes this brother tick, how he approaches the work, the ever important work that he does, and maybe what's on the horizon for the next great things that you can expect to see from Eddie Francis. So, are you on board with that?
Yes, I am.
So I'll just jump right on into it. You can check out his bio on his website, eddiefrancis.com. But I'm just going to jump right on into the questions that I have for you today. So first, let's first things first. Why did you start For Our Edification? Like, what hope did you have that listeners would get out of these conversations that you have specifically on For Our Edification?
Well, so the precursor, you remember, to For Our Edification was the Eddie Francis podcast show.
Yes.
And I actually started it. It was a hobby because I had been out of radio for several years. When I started the podcast, I had a scratch or an itch that I really wanted to scratch. And I just decided that I would do it by starting a podcast. And I kind of needed a hobby, so that was it. And then and then at some point I started to remember that one of the things I enjoyed the most about radio was interviewing people and getting other people's stories and finding out who they were and what made them tick. Um, and at some point, at another point, I realized that the people that I was hearing from and whose stories I was collecting, they had some really cool stuff to talk about. But I started to really get into what they were doing as far as personal development. And the personal development stories was where I really started to say, okay, well, hold on, let me go more in the direction of personal leadership, which came from you because one day you mentioned the term personal leadership and I loved it. And so I thought, okay, that's what I really want to do with this. I really want to go in this direction of finding out what people do to grow themselves, to develop themselves. And there you go. That's where we are with For Our Edification. And the reason I changed the name from the Eddie Francis podcast show to For Our Edification, quite frankly, because nobody knew who the hell I was. But then I mean, serious. I mean, I was like, well, this is kind. I mean, it's not like I'm Steve Harvey or somebody. It's not like I'm Kevin Hart, or it's not like I'm,
Well, you do have a story there, but yeah, Kevin
it's
Hart.
not like it's not like I'm Brian Gumble or anybody like that, where people like, ooh, Eddie Francis put out a podcast. Let's go listen to that. So later on, I decided to change the name because what I started thinking was, okay, well, this is really much more about the message that I want to send to people. And, people always say, well, for your edification, which I think is kind of arrogant when people are just like, well, for your edification, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, well, no, let's make it an us thing. And that's why I started thinking, well, for our edification. The funniest thing is everybody thinks I picked the word edification because of Eddie.
I kind of did.
No, I wasn't even thinking about that when I did it. And as a matter of fact, so when I started Edify Ventures, just as a side note, when I started Edify Ventures, the next American Marketing Association conference I went to, and I saw all of my colleagues after I started the company, there's this one named Ken. And Ken, I should say. Ken is hilarious. And Kim walked up to me, she goes, oh, are you edifying people now? And I was going, yeah. And she was like, good job, edify. And I was like, what is she? And I was like, oh, okay. So I had no earthly, I wasn't even putting those together.
Okay. So that I'm so glad you shared that because there are pieces that I didn't know. I didn't realize.
Oops.
So let's unpack edify, right? Because I'm a person who's big on definitions, and I really want to hear your perspective on the thoughtfulness behind your choice of language, your choice of words, and edify. And edification beyond it being ed.
Yeah, it really was my flipping the term for for your edification to for our edification. And but I did like the word edification because of the concept of building, constructing, erecting something. And I like this idea of us building our knowledge base more, building our awareness, doing some self-construction and that sort of thing. So that's actually what went into, that was the other thing that went into my picking the title for Our Edification.
So it's about personal development. It's about building the person that you want to be, or that listeners want to be, and recognizing that we are all in this together. Like we're all a part of this.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm thinking back to a couple of episodes, like the last one I did with my Lion brother, Michael Jenkins. It's kind of messed up, but he and I have never really talked about his pursuing acting full time. We've known each other for over 35 years now, and that's a conversation we've never had. And I found it fascinating, and I wanted to find out from him what was going on. And what I loved about that interview was how much Mike really, really talked about just this idea of being determined to meet a goal. And you better do something. If you have this goal, if you have this dream, first of all, he was just so solid about you better have some kind of dream. And then it turned into, and if you're going to have the dream, then this is what you got to do. This is how you have to do it. This is how I went after it. This is why I don't quit. This is why I keep going. And I really hope that when people log on and listen to that interview, they really get from him the value of self-determination.
Wow.
And how special it is to have a dream. Because when we were in college together, that's when he started talking about acting. And then he graduates, and I look up one day, and he's on TV, and I'm going, wait a minute, he's doing it. He's actually doing it, yeah. And so so that's an interview. That's an example that I hope people, when they listen to it, they listen to him, and they listen to all this self-determination he has, and how he has just never, ever given up on his dream. And the last movie he did, he got to sit across from one of his idols, Morgan Freeman, and act opposite him. And he was just like, he had a hard time even talking about it without getting himself, what it was like to actually sit across from Morgan Freeman and to do a scene with him.
Wow.
And so I really hope that that's an example. That's an example of an episode that I hope when people listen to it, they're going, okay, I have a dream too. And I need to chase my dream with the same kind of determination that Michael Shannon Jenkins is chasing his.
That's beautiful. So you talk a lot about identity and value. And you mentioned in our opening, or as we were first getting started, about your background in radio and career in radio. And one of my favorite stories that I hear about, when we first moved here, I learned about this person, and I had heard the name, but hadn't learned. Fast Eddie Francis. So I would meet people, talk to people, even in a important conversation that I was having. Someone said, "Wait, you're married to Fast Eddie Francis?" And they shared these stories about the impact that identity, that persona had on them as a New Orleanian.
Okay.
So talk to me about your identity, including Fast Eddie Francis, and juxtaposed to value.
That's a weird one. No, it is, because first of all, I didn't think I played that much of a role in local radio. I mean, I wasn't. Okay, so listen, I worked in radio alongside the late CJ Superstar Morgan, who was the host of just one of the city's greatest morning shows ever.
Now, to clarify, your career in radio was spanned how long, or had spanned how long?
Oh, good question. Over 30 years. So I started working at Q93 in 1993.
Okay. So
January of 93 as an intern.
So 1993. Yeah. And in that time, the listenership was mostly local. It was local market. So, where I'm from, our radio personalities were a part of our local fabric, right? They were part of the stories of the city. So continue.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that, first of all, I was there part-time, and I was there mostly part-time. And I think the takeoff for me was on the CJ, the CJ and Company morning show. So it was me I was producing for CJ and then Monica Pierre. And Monica is still active in media. She teaches communications at Xavier. And so as far as I was concerned, I was the producer. They were the stars of the show. I got in and I just wanted to do goofy stuff. So I just did goofy stuff. And then I'm also on the air alongside, Wild Wayne, Uptown Angela, A.D. Barry, the world famous A.D. Barry, DJ Rowe. These people, these people are local legends, right? And they are still doing their thing. So I don't know what it is about me that people remember quite. I'm being honest. I really don't know what they remember, but I think they remember that I was just part of the crew. And I'll be honest with you, I'll be honest. I never really liked the Fast Eddie moniker.
Okay.
I never liked it because, first of all, it wasn't mine. Because I don't remember what I wanted to be called, but I wanted to be called something else. There was actually, there was actually a coworker who called me Edo. And I was like, I kind of like this Edo thing. And that's what I really wanted to be. But Fast Eddie did come organically because I was driving a radio station van one day. The air staff was in the back of the van, and I was on St. Charles Avenue. We were actually headed to some event at Audubon Zoo, and I was working in the promotions department at the time, so I wasn't on there yet. And they started giving me a hard time about driving too slowly. And I said, there's like 7 of you in the back of the van. And it was a cargo van.
Oh, so you were safe. You're being safe.
I was trying to be safe. I didn't want to bounce people around the van.
Good job.
So somebody was just like, and I want to say it was LeBron Joseph. You, LeBron, you're the reason for this. So somebody started giving me a hard time saying, oh, come on, Eddie. You just going to stop at every single yellow light, aren't you? And I was just like, well, I'm trying to be safe because y'all are back there and there are no seats. It's a cargo van. So, they were sitting back there like prisoners. And so I was like, okay, fine. So we get further down St. Charles. As a matter of fact, we were at St. Charles and Calhoun because I remember Loyola was right on the right of us. And the light was yellow. So I gunned it. And I got across the yellow light. And then I was like, okay, y'all want me to drive faster? I'm driving faster. And then I went and I did my thing. And we got to Audubon Zoo. And CJ was the one who, when he got out of the van and he was doing a break, he said, yeah, luckily we got here in one piece thanks to Fast Eddie. And I was like, oh, okay. And it stuck. And I was like, So when I went on the air, and actually started on the air in 96. So when I started on the air, they were just hell-bent on calling me Fast Eddie. They would not call me anything other than that. And on top of that, there's this cat named Ed Spears. Who was interning, I think, at the station at the time. And Ed works for it's funny, Ed and I are in contact still because he works for an academic company out of Texas. And they gave Ed the name Edo. And I was like, you funky? Oh, I was so mad I was hot as a firecracker with him.
He gave him Edo.
Yeah, he got Edo and I got Fast Eddie. But, Fast Eddie stuck because it's fast. It's easy to remember. It's catchy. There's already a Fast Eddie character out there, Fast Eddie Folsom. But, so, I didn't really like the moniker all that much because it wasn't what I had in mind for myself. And so I did it, though, because I was on a hip hop station.
Okay.
And hip hop, you honestly, you got to go with something like that in hip hop.
Yeah,
so,
could have been Edo, but yeah.
No. I do think Fast Eddie worked better. However, when I went over to FM 98, which was a station that was doing the adult music, I was like, well, I can't be Fast Eddie over here. So I very happily dropped Fast and just went with Eddie Francis. And I felt like I actually got more of an identity at FM 98 than I did at Q93. But clearly people remember because my best friend, Jeff, funky so-and-so, will not stop calling me Fast Eddie. He will not stop calling me. He introduces me to everybody as Fast Eddie.
He does. And
people remember. The thing is so funny is that every time he does it, somebody goes, oh, that's you. And I'm going, yeah, that's me.
That's you.
Yeah,
and they're happy to see you. They're happy to be in the presence of Fast Eddie Francis because they always have a story that goes with it.
I know, it was funny. Yeah, I mean, so Halima and I having this conversation just a few nights after a party we went to, and Jeff kept doing it, and somebody turned it into a whole story about a club, the duck off. Mm-hmm. If you're from New Orleans and you're black, you know exactly what the duck off is if you're of a certain age. And this brother went to the whole story about him and the other guys who on the duck off, and I was like, this all started with Jeff introduced me as Fast Eddie. And the dude was just like, I thought I knew you from somewhere. Yep. And I was just like, oh, yeah.
And I think as we think about identity and value, mm-hmm. like who we are, how people see us, mm-hmm. and how special those memories are to who they've become. Mm-hmm. Like you named all these wonderful people who made such an impact. Mm-hmm. Myself hearing stories about, I remember being X age on the school bus, mm-hmm. hearing Fast Eddie Francis, and
I've heard that one. And I was on the school bus. I used to hear you with CJ Morgan. Yeah.
Right. And those memories are really special to people, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think as I'm thinking about takeaways all the time, and you don't know the impact of your identity, even when it's not to you what it is to other people.
Yeah.
You just don't know the impact of your identity.
Yeah. That's the thing I'm really interested in, because I do know that I was known at Q93. I was known as the smart one on the air, because mm-hmm. I was the one who sounded the most educated. Mm-hmm. And not that I was the most educated, but I just sounded mm-hmm. like that. And I was actually told at one point to dumb myself down. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, nah, I'm not doing that. Mm-hmm. I spent all these years in college. Mm-hmm. Why would I do that? And so, and I do mean all these years in college. And so I was just like, why would I even do that? I mean, and then on top of that, I loved having fun. And mm-hmm. I loved the fun that I had as Fast Eddie. But I also remember that I'm the son of Nelson and Juanita, two educators who educated a lot of Black folks in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And her students and their colleagues were always listening. They always heard me. Because I know those people call back with reports from my parents about stuff that I said or did on the air. And so I was just like, well, no, I mean, I'm not going to dumb myself down, mm-hmm. And what's wrong with, even though this is a hip hop station, what's wrong with somebody sounding educated on a hip hop station? Mm-hmm. So there was this concept that I was just not really fitting in all that well. But I did hear from some folks, things like, no, somebody did tell me this once. They said, I really like listening to you because you were the one who sounded like you knew what you were talking about. Mm. And I didn't half the time, but
But it's and I think that's interesting too. So I'm processing just reflections on this, mm-hmm. right? So when we're asked to compromise or change our identity for certain spaces, mm-hmm. When we are resolute in not mm-hmm. doing that, when we have a very clear North Star, so to speak, and mm-hmm. that gives us those guideposts, mm-hmm. because the ascent or the transition to leadership is not linear. Mm-hmm. The becoming the leader that you want to be, you are going to face difficult questions, opportunities. Mm-hmm. Every opportunity is not the right opportunity. So when you are asked to compromise in ways that that just don't align with who you are, beyond not being comfortable with it, mm-hmm. but things that just don't align, I think your story is really powerful in how you balance that, how thoughtful you should be mm-hmm. in managing that. Can you speak to the importance of just the awareness and thoughtfulness in your own personal internal leadership in your journey to becoming perhaps a public leader?
I think the radio station in a weird way was a really good foundation
Mm,
because um, when I did it, what I thought to myself was, I want something more than this.
mm,
And for a lot of people who are working in radio, that was a really big thing for them to do it. But for me, I thought there was something bigger.
mm,
And so what I really wanted to do is I wanted to explore other things that I could do. And when I got the opportunity to speak with monster.com, then that was a shift that I was looking for. And that's when
mm,
I started to really think of myself more as a leader.
mm,
And I
mm,
started to, because I had this really great opportunity with Monsters Making Account programs to stand in front of a group of high school students and college students almost on a daily basis and talk to them about the next step in their lives.
mm,
And to me, that was much bigger than radio. It
mm,
was huge to me, as a matter of fact. And I got to travel. I mean, I traveled through over half the states in the country. I traveled throughout over half the parishes in Louisiana
mm,
to speak to students and to speak to high school and college students. And so and that's when I really started to realize, okay, well, now I can use my voice for something that means something to me.
mhm,
And it's funny with me, I, for the longest time, tried to stay away from education
mhm.
because my daddy was, both of my parents were high school teachers. So for
Right.
anybody in New Orleans, who is Black and may have had any contact with Xavier Prep or Booker T. Washington, my mom was Juanita Francis, a math and science teacher. My dad was Nelson Francis, a music and English teacher. And I wanted to do something to honor them.
Mhm,
When I started doing Making It Count, I was like, okay, this is what I can do to really honor them. And luckily, they got a chance to hear me talk about it.
mhm,
My mother only for a few months, but she loved hearing stories about me going to visit, college campuses, and then my dad got to hear more of it. But then later on in life, I started to really think more about how how much bigger my family's background in education is, because my mother's father was a teacher.
mm,
My mother's stepmother, my mama Constance, she was a teacher. And then my dad told me the story of my great grandfather,
mhm.
Maynard Hilaire Nelson, who actually had a conversation with the Archbishop of New Orleans to invite the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament to found a Catholic university for Black students, and that became Xavier.
Oh, wow.
And then the part of the story that I did not know, that I read about later, is that Papa Medard, what he did was he did it because the state was moving Southern University out of New Orleans at the time. This was in the early 1900s.
Mhm,
And so he saw that there was a void
mhm,
in local higher education. And so when I realized that I came from all of that, then I started to really take myself a bit more seriously as a leader, and my attitude about being on the air started changing too.
wow.
I started to see more of a responsibility. And so for me, I think the big thing about leadership is people, number one, being responsible for themselves, and really understanding what it is that they're trying to accomplish, not just for themselves, but for other people. And I started to take that more seriously with myself.
Wow. So your journey into this space, into the
Hmm.
personal leadership space, into the even the organizational leadership space, because you talk about that a lot as well,
Hmm.
and community leadership, another area that you speak on sometimes. It started with your own personal journey.
Hmm. It did.
And so you went on to deepen your knowledge and expertise in leadership studies. Um, so how do you translate that to benefit people like nonprofit leaders and
Mm.
education, small business leaders? Share with us some of the ways that you engage with that, and some of the ways that you share of your personal experiences along with the expertise you've developed through education.
Yeah. So the place where I start with it, so I'll start with the education part, because when I went through my strategic leadership program, the master's program at Tennessee State, that I love that
And
program.
this was a graduate
That
program,
was a
right?
graduate program. And when I went through that program, the thing that hit me really, really hard throughout the program is that leadership is a people process. I don't see it as a title. I don't see it as, some people see leadership as a vanity project, and I've actually posted this on social media a few months ago. It was like, leadership is not a vanity project. If you want to be liked, leadership is not the
That's
thing
not
to
the
do.
place for you.
It's not the thing to do if you want to be liked.
You can honestly guarantee you probably won't be liked.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's yeah. And so for me, my orientation to it was watching a bunch of people, honestly, who did a bad job at it, because they wanted the results, but they didn't want to treat people well. And that didn't make sense to me. I was like, well, how are you going to get the results out of me if you're going to treat me like crap? There's just no way I'm going to do it. And I experienced it in radio. I experienced it in higher ed. It just didn't make sense to me. Like I really dealt with these people who were unabashedly self-centered. And so they were doing things only for themselves, only for their resumes. They had the title, they were satisfied, yet they expected the results of someone who actually treats people well. And that was the part that didn't make sense to me. And so so when I got into grad school and I started to really understand stuff and learn stuff, I was just like, okay, well, this is a people process. You got to put your people first, because if you don't put your people first, if you don't treat your people well, you're not going to get your results. There's just no way. That's not going to happen. The other thing is that the other thing, and I was trying not to tell this story, but I'm going to tell the damn story. So there was a CEO I was working with who had just started working at the company, and they looked around and they were talking to me because I was doing communications, and they said, we need to work on my personal brand. And I was like, well, you just got here. You don't even know what's happening in this organization. So how are we going to work on your personal brand before you even understand who these people are that you're working with and the condition of the organization?
So this is before even understanding where they are, what they're doing, and what the moment calls for.
They didn't really. They had literally only been there like a few weeks, and I'm sitting there going, this organization has a lot going on. And in that moment, I thought to myself, well, this person, they got to lead themselves before they can lead other people. I realized that if a person who is in a leadership position is having real issues with a sense of identity, or if they're having issues just keeping themselves together, they can't lead other people. There's just absolutely no way they can do it. If they are freaking out every 3 minutes, or again, if they are just focused on self-interest and that sort of thing, and they have not figured themselves out, then once they start dealing with other people, it's going to be a mess. And I watched it happen with several people. And I'm thinking, well, you can't even, in the term you taught me, you have no sense of personal leadership. So how's anybody going to trust you? Because one thing I've learned as someone who was in a follower position is that you can sniff out somebody who is going to do a crappy job in a second. It doesn't take long. And as soon as they start showing themselves, you lose trust. You really, really lose trust when they show themselves as someone who is not being thoughtful about working with other people and leading people. And unfortunately for this CEO, they didn't get the buy-in they were looking for. People did not trust, and they still talk about how they didn't trust this person, and it didn't work out, unfortunately. But what happened is that the organization suffered in the process, and some people suffered in the process. And so that was the other thing. The other thing about leadership that I really, really started to pick up about leadership was the importance of listening. And I think some of the best leaders that I've spoken to, they talk about things that they understood and heard from people. And the people who I have really admired as leaders, I've also noticed that they have changed the way that they've done things because of what they heard from people. And they weren't afraid to change. I was in that situation. I had I had somebody on my team who was a social media person. I had been looking to hire someone, and I found this person, got him hired. I was really excited about him. The thing is that in between the time I hired that person and the last social media coordinator I had to handle social media for the organization that I was working for. So I just thought that I was becoming like a social media master. And so when this person and I were talking in one-on-ones, I was like, okay, do this, do that, do this, do this, do that. Ooh, you know what I found out? Ooh, do this. Look at this Instagram page, and so. And one day I noticed that they kind of started shifting in their seats during our one-on-ones and kind of stopped paying attention to me a little bit. And I was going, oh, what's going on? And I was like, oh, you know what? I'm talking too much. And so I stopped and and then in one of the meetings, I just stopped and I said, well, what do you think? What do you want to do? And they started telling me all their ideas. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay, let's go with that. They blew up the social media for the organization. They did things that they did things I would never have imagined doing. And all I had to do was shut up and listen, and I learned a lot by doing that. And I made it a point from then on to really, really try to listen to the people around me, even if I didn't hear what they even if I didn't want to hear what they had to say. Like if I was dead tired or if I heard them going on and on and on and on about stuff, I was like, okay, Eddie, just shut up and listen to them. And I learned a lot, and I was able to help people work through some personal things. I was able to help them resolve work-related things, and so those are three things that for me really informed my development as a leader. It was definitely, listening to people. It was definitely having a sense of personal leadership, but then also realizing that leadership is a people process.
Wow, it's as sometimes as leaders we feel like we need to come to the table with all the answers.
Yeah.
And all the best answers. And
one of the biggest misconceptions about leadership,
right,
I think, is that you have to have all the answers.
Right.
And it's like, no, you don't. I mean, and I was the same way. I mean, when I was in my last leadership position, at one point I thought I needed to have all the answers. And one day I'm sitting in my office and I'm looking around. I was like, whoa, what the hell are all these people here for?
So if you have that, yes. And the detriment is not only to the organization, but when we talk about personal leadership, there's personal cost to that too. So leaders burn out. I can imagine feeling like they have to come to the table with all the answers.
Yeah. I mean, so going back to the CEO I was working with, that was their story. They wound up burning out. And it sucked to see it, but it wasn't a surprise because once again, in my opinion, this was somebody who was trying to have all the answers. And it just got to a point where something had to give. So
as we kind of wrap up a little bit, and let me backtrack. Thank you for sharing all of this.
Okay.
I'm learning about you.
Okay.
And so I tell the story a lot, or sometimes. So one of the significant points in when Eddie and I met is when you coached me in public speaking. I did not finish all of my sessions. I'm a public speaking coaching dropout. But as he sips his tea. But oftentimes people share with me how things I've said landed with them. And I can let you know that I'm grateful to you for helping me find my voice. Because as a leader, I'm naturally a shy person. I hold leadership positions, and I don't like public speaking, right? So you helped me to find my voice and to be confident in my voice. And a lot of that process dealt with finding my North Star and just figuring out what I wanted to say, like what I had to contribute to the conversation. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
For folk you work with, people you work with, what are some of the areas of personal leadership that you help them to address?
Well, I'll use public speaking coaching because I really consider public speaking coaching leadership training in another form.
I would agree.
And, I did this post on LinkedIn actually where I said public speaking isn't about you being on stage. It's about you having a message that you think is so important that you want to share it with a lot of people. And, one of the things that I center on when I work with public speaking clients is what's so important that you feel you have to tell a whole bunch of people this thing, like a room full of people. If it's that important to you, then there's a lesson that you feel that you must feel that you're trying to teach people. So what is that? And how do we make sure that that lesson comes through in a way that's going to really get people's attention, And that's when we get into more of the public speaking tactics, like projection and articulation and all these other things. But what's most important to me is that people feel that people feel confident enough that whatever it is that they want to say, they say it. And they find a way to say it so that it's effective and then it lands with people. But I think the other thing was, and to go back, so the question was, what are
some of the things that you work with people on in person?
Yeah. So the other thing is, I would say, again, lead by leading you, so, how do you lead yourself? How do you develop yourself and finding out what exactly that looks like? Now, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. And I'm not even gonna say I'm a certified coach or anything like that, but it is important to me that people define something that they are working on getting better at. And one of the things I pick up in public speaking is I do pick up when people are being resistant to something. I do pick up when people are being resistant to something. So one client I had, I was trying to figure out what was going on with this client because they were doing a really good job with all the training. And I was like, well, what is it? There's something that this person is resisting. Well, they were kind of resisting letting go a little bit. So when I started going over movement exercises, that's when I started to find stuff. And I was like, well, what's going on? Just do what's up with the exercise? Why won't you do the exercise? And they kind of just, gave out on me. And they were like, okay. And we ended the sessions. And then I didn't quite do any more sessions with them because they only wanted a certain number of sessions, which was my first question. I was like, why do you only want a certain number of sessions? I have this many. And I think one of the things was that they were kind of just having a hard time letting go because they were used to editing themselves and they were used to they were used to keeping themselves in kind of this enclosed space. And I was trying to get them to get bigger and, and that sort of thing. I wasn't trying to get them to get wacky or anything, but I wanted them to let go a little bit. And so, in that case, the leadership lesson, I think the personal leadership lesson was you got to trust yourself more. Trust yourself more to go ahead and really, really get out there, the other personal leadership lesson is, and this is a big one, listening, the value of listening. I'll tell your story on this one because I tell this story all the time because it is the greatest leadership story that I've heard. Is when you told me that you were sitting in this meeting with other women in academia who were department chairs, I believe, and you said one of them, and I really wish we knew who to credit this to, but she said, don't be so worried about hitting the ground listening. I mean, hitting the ground running, hit the ground listening, which again, back to the CEO who had a hard time. That was another one of their things. They kept talking about hitting the ground running, and they were talking about it so much that at one point I was like, are you actually listening? Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, the survey says, ding, no. Because other people came to me and said, I really wish this person would listen, which I think contributed to their burnout. And so I think the other thing, and I'm going to go back to something I said also a little earlier as a personal leadership lesson. Look at leadership as a process, because and allow yourself opportunities to go through the process. So I think one of the biggest leadership mistakes I've ever made is that when something got funky with me, I would back off and I basically would kind of quit. And that's a bad thing to do. If you are going, I think it's Winston Churchill that said, if you're going through a storm, keep going. No, if you're going through hell, keep going. And I think leadership is like that. You got to keep going. And so part of that is realizing that it is a process and giving yourself the opportunity to go through the process and realizing before you even start that it's a process. So you are going to have to allow yourself that opportunity. And it's not like I've ever been a CEO. It's not like I've ever been a CEO, but I have been the person in a follower position who's gone, okay, well, don't give up now. You got us to this point. Mm-hmm. So you got to adjust. So what's your adjustment going to be to get us through this thing, to do that? And I really respect leaders who are able to adjust, leaders who are able to adapt, and leaders who are able to realize that they are going through a process.
Well, I want to respectfully correct you. You are a CEO.
No. I am. All right. I forgot all about that. I'll be damned.
He's not so caught up in titles, y'all.
I'm really not.
Well, thank you. You have certainly dropped some gems in this conversation. Thank you for indulging me and doing this interview. I've certainly learned a lot about self-determination, the impact of identity, the process of leadership. There's a whole list that I'm sure I will cultivate as I go back and listen to this. But thank you just for your time, your commitment, and all that you've invested in making sure that the space of leadership is a healthy space, where people have good experiences and where they are affirmed and they feel safe to thrive. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
He's not paying me anything. So if we want to follow up, if we want to connect with you, where can we find Eddie Francis? I know you just launched a new project. Mm-hmm. Your website.
The cat doesn't like the website at all, apparently. So he decides to speak up. EddieFrancis.com. EddieFrancis.com, cat. EddieFrancis.com.
And your new show, your new project that you just launched.
The Way Forward, a radio show on WBOK in New Orleans. So WBOK1230.com. I hate this damn cat. WBOK1230.com. He is such a hater. Why are cats such haters?
So the next show we do together, we're going to let you see our cat and dog team. Asa and Allegra. And it sounds like the cat is in here, but the cat's in a whole nother room. And he never talks any other time. So the Way Forward on WBOK. The Way Forward on WBOK. Website, eddiefrancis.com. He's on most social media channels, very thoughtful about where he engages in conversation and how he does so. So please check out all the great work that Eddie Francis is doing.
Thank you.